Good evening, everyone. My name is Len Stewart, and I'd like to welcome you back to Goffstown Today, a local public affairs program that's being brought to you by the Goffstown Democratic Committee. Our goal in this continuing series is to provide meaningful information and discussion of issues that are important to the greater Goffstown community and the state of New Hampshire. I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Mr. James McKim, President of the Manchester branch of the NAACP. Mr. McKim is a resident of Goffstown and is a managing partner of Organizational Ignition, a consulting firm that specializes in the improvement of organizational performance through diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mr. McKim is also a longtime activist and advocate on New Hampshire public issues related to communities of color. Most recently, Mr. McKim was a member of the state's Law Enforcement Accountability, Community, and Transparency Commission. That panel, which was named in mid-2020 by Governor Chris Sununu in the wake of the protests that rocked the country after the deaths of African Americans George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police, produced a report on police operations in New Hampshire that includes 48 recommendations on training, data, interactions with members of the public, and police discipline. Today, however, we'll be asking Mr. McKim to start a bit more generally, talking about the mission of the NAACP and its work in New Hampshire. Mr. McKim, could you start out with perhaps some history of the NAACP in the state and some of the current projects and priorities you have going on?
Sure. Thank you, Lynn. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. So if we could have slide one, please. A little bit about the history of the organization. Founded in 1909 by a number of people, three of whom you see at the top of the image: Moorfield Story, Mary White, Ovington, and W.E.B. Du Bois, Massachusetts native, as a result of the Niagara movement and conversations that were happening around race and abolitionism at that time. The vision of the organization is to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race. And the mission to try to achieve that vision is securing the political, educational, social, and economic equity of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health of and well-being of all persons. And what's really interesting to think about is we're talking about all persons, not just people of color. And the NAACP is actually an organization made up of people from all races, not just people of color. So with that backdrop, if we could have slide two, I believe. So slide two shows a timeline at the bottom, history of the association, formed, as I said, in 1909, established as a national organization. In 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education famous case came up that addressed the issue of allowing children of color to attend schools. 1958, the Greater Seacoast NAACP branch, Seacoast here in New Hampshire, was founded. In 1964, and it's not showing on the slide there, but the Manchester branch of the NAACP was founded in 1964, and the Greater Nashua branch was founded in 2008. So there are three branches of the NAACP in New Hampshire, and we roll up into a state coalition. A number of us get together on a regular basis and look at issues that are at the state level, whereas the branches themselves individually focus on issues at their city-wide level. So the Manchester branch that I am president of serves the greater Manchester area. There is a New England Region Council headed by our president, Juan Cofield, where issues that are of import and have an impact across the northern New England states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We come together as a coalition of branches. There are 34 branches across northern New England, and we address issues that cross northern New England. So that's a bit about the history and the structure of the NAACP and its mission, and hopefully that gives folks a sense of who we are and a little bit about what we're trying to achieve.
Well, let me ask if I could, are there any special challenges? You mentioned a number of branches across northern New England. Are there any special challenges that you face in a region like this? I think I looked up the statistic, and New Hampshire and Vermont are among like the top 5 states in terms of white population. There's a very small minority community. Does that pose special problems for from the NAACP's point?
I would say the answer is yes, it does. So what's really interesting is that the NAACP is really focused on addressing issues of people of color that transpire in larger cities where there's a real population of people of color. We don't have that, as you pointed out, here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, as a population, we are 91.2% white. We are 1.5% Black and 2.5% Latino. So much of the thinking around what's good for people of color that comes from the NAACP National is focused on those larger areas, those larger urban areas where there is a predominance of people of color. Because we don't have that predominance, we don't have many of the issues that those larger areas have. And that's not to say we don't have discrimination happening, because it absolutely does happen here. And if we go to slide 5, I can point out some of the issues that we see right here in New Hampshire today, as well as a little bit of the history. So what you see on the left, some people may recognize this, some people may not. This is a map of Manchester in the 1940s. And in the 1940s, there was discrimination in the form of what's called redlining. And redlining was a practice and in fact law in many cities across the country where people of color were not allowed to purchase property in certain areas of the city, were not allowed to get loans for property or anything in certain parts of the city that were marked on maps in red. So this is actually a map of Manchester, and you see some red areas, some of them along the Merrimack River, which flows somewhat down the middle of that gray part that flows through the map. So if you know anything about Manchester today, you know that those areas that are in red are actually some of the still depressed areas of Manchester. So even though segregation is no longer a law, Jim Crow has been outlawed, the legacy of those practices exists with us and impacts us today. Now, Goffstown didn't have the redlining or those kinds of practices, but many of us who live in Goffstown work in Manchester. So we know about these areas. The flag. So this is an interesting flag. Many people recognize this as the Confederate flag. What is interesting about this picture, though, is this is a particular Confederate flag. It has holes in it, which are actually burn marks. This flag was found in the mailbox of an African-American family right here in Goffstown 2 years ago. And the case, the police have still not determined who placed that flag in that mailbox. The FBI is actually investigating this case. So it's this kind of discrimination that happened in New Hampshire and close to us and is happening today, that is not as intense as it is in larger cities, but we have it here nonetheless. Even healthcare disparities. The cases of COVID that have been reported. I believe the statistics are that while I shared that the white population in New Hampshire is 91.2%, white people constitute only 73% of the COVID cases. So you've got a 5 times the number of cases than the population representation for COVID.
What about other issues that are kind of related? Things like the implicit bias. I know that there's been an issue in the State House about implicit bias training. Is that a special challenge in a society like this?
I think there is a special challenge posed because people don't see, because white people don't see very many people of color. If they see them at all, they don't believe there's a problem. And there is a problem, as we've just seen in the examples that I've shown. So it's been a challenge, although I think we've had some success because of the George Floyd murder and the murders of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and others. There's an awakening that perhaps we need to do something. And a good start to this, and I say a start to this, is to have implicit bias training, because we all have implicit bias. I have implicit bias. I've been taught through media, through what I've learned in the history books, that people of color are inferior. They're not to be trusted. So implicit bias training, I'm so pleased that we're getting implicit bias training for the Police Standards and Training Council, which runs the police academy that all our law enforcement officers across the state must take training from them, and also other branches of law enforcement and of criminal justice are engaging in implicit bias training. The prosecutors, I participated in a training, facilitated training for over 600 prosecutors around the state. The New Hampshire Bar Association is looking at implicit bias training. So that training is happening, but it's not enough, because implicit bias is just the root cause of the issue here. We have to deal with the manifestations of implicit bias, including microaggressions and this notion of the white norm, white normativeness. And the term that's generally used for that is white privilege, unearned privileges because of the color of your skin. But I like to think of it as white normative. Our society is built on white being the norm. Mm-hmm. And we have to first acknowledge that, and then see how we can change that so white is not the norm. It's important, but products and services like shampoo in a hotel bathroom need to be designed such that they address, that they work on Black people's hair just as much as they work on white people's hair.
Something I hadn't even thought of. Thank you for that. Let me move on, and I think this probably goes hand in hand with the kind of training that you're talking about. You did a program with the Goffstown library last year, community conversations about race in the wake of all of the national protests. Are you planning to continue it, and what subject areas, what's in store for 2021?
Sure. So we did our first set of community conversations actually back in 2019, 18 and 19. And we've brought, for example, Debbie Irving, who's the author of Waking Up White, to the Dana Center. And she gave a fabulous lecture to folks who were there. So we're continuing the conversations with a focus on education. We recognize that there are challenges with our education system here in Goffstown, and our superintendent and our principals are all aware of this and are looking for ways to make sure that the school system is one where everyone feels like they belong. Everyone feels like they belong. So we're going to be talking about education and the impact of belonging in education. We're going to be talking a bit about law enforcement and how that is an important service that's provided. Chief Eric Serino is going to be involved in those conversations, and how his department really works to make sure that we have a community that is law-abiding and everyone feels welcome and like they belong. So there's a couple of topics. We've got some other topics in mind that we're thinking about as well, but those are a couple that I think worth mentioning here.
Now, that be something you'll be working with through the library again, or
Yes.
are you also working with the school, the SAU, the school system on some of these?
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll be working jointly, and we also have St. Anselm involved in the conversations as there's some great work that's going on there with the Dana Center and the Center for Ethics, who have folks come in occasionally to do presentations. So we're definitely engaging them, and we're also going to try to engage local government, having a conversation. And the theme for this year's conversations are conversations on belonging. If you haven't been able to tell from my talking about belonging before, but we also want to make sure that local government is involved in these conversations as they pass local laws and regulations for our city, our town.
I know that something that I've thought about. I'm a member of the Goffstown Zoning Board. So it's something that, we give some thought to. Zoning is a very big issue. We don't have redlining anymore, but there are other implicit things in zoning that perhaps we could have a conversation on that at some other point.
Would love to. That's what our conversations are all about. And we don't want to have people wait to have these conversations when we host a gathering. These conversations should be happening all the time in all places. And it's such a shame that we've been brought up to not talk about sensitive issues. And it's that adhering to that notion of not talking about sensitive issues, race, politics, religion, that has gotten us to where we are today, to be in such a divisive place. So really encourage folks to have the conversations, be brave.
Well, let's hope so. Let me move to our last topic for today. We got about 5 minutes left, and I'd like you to, there's a number of things going on in Concord. We've had a complete changeover in control of both houses of the legislature and the state executive council. And I'm just wondering what issues concern you and the NAACP in this year's legislative session.
Well, there are a number of, of items that really concern us, that our legislation that is up in front of both the House and the Senate right now. One that really concerns us is HB 544, which essentially was a copy of the Trump administration's executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping, which made basically any training on race and race relations and sex was banned, was not allowed, is not to be allowed. So HB 544 is trying to have that same kind of effect on the state. And so that's really concerning to us, because otherwise, how do we learn if we can't have sessions on it? There are other bills around public safety, around body cameras being worn, prohibiting no-knock warrants. HB 507 we're concerned about. Education savings accounts, HB 607, HB 20 around school vouchers. Those are just a few of the legislation that we're really concerned about, and the legislature is packing a lot into this next few weeks in terms of hearings. So really encourage folks to go to the House and the Senate's the legislative websites and see what bills are out there, and talk to your representatives about what you think they should be doing to be equitable and fair.
The school voucher bill in particular, which would take money away from the public schools and put it into a private, is something that could presumably have a much heavier impact on lower income communities of color than on, say, the average suburban school district in New Hampshire, I would think.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting bill, because on one hand, we want to protect the public schools and the funding that is for those public schools and everyone who's in them. On the other hand, and this is what I call the short-term, long-term tension. On the other hand, we know that the schools districts in many cases are failing students of color. So how do we get those students the education that they need today, while we still try to fix the system, and we know that the system doesn't have the funding that it needs today. So there's a great tension there, and it's embodied in that bill. And I think, you know, there needs to be more discussion. That bill, the way that it's written, should not be passed. But the premise that brought it up, trying to help provide resources for those underprivileged students who are not going to get the education they need in the public school system, we need to help them too.
I know that education financing has been an issue since day one that I moved to New Hampshire, when my children were about knee high, and it's the same debate, never enough.
Never enough. Never enough. But I'm confident we can work through it. We can get there. It's just we need everyone looking at this legislation and expressing their opinion. Get involved.
I will only say amen. We're down to about a minute to go. If there's anything you would like to add, and I would like to, on behalf of the Democratic Committee, sounds like there's a lot more that we could cover, and we'd like to invite you back for another session time at your convenience. If there's any closing remarks that you have, please feel free. And, once again, thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure. Well, thank you. And even though I'm president of the Manchester branch of the NAACP, which most people would say is a liberal progressive organization, I am a firm believer of balance. I'm also an Episcopalian. I attend St. Matthew's Church right here in center of town. Mm-hmm. And we Episcopalians live by what's referred to as the via media, the middle way. And I would just invite everyone to think in those terms. What's the middle way? How do we recognize that everyone has a perspective, everyone has value, everyone has a truth, And we need in our society to have conversations across difference, communication across difference, to find out what's the via media to get us all what we need to survive.
Well, let us hope that somehow we can find that so that perhaps in this society one day we're talking to each other rather than past each
And
other.
then each other. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. McKim. We appreciate it, and please come back soon.
Thank you.
And in conclusion, just to let everyone know, you can watch these programs. They will be aired here on Goffstown TV. They're going to be posted on the video page of our website, which is goffstowndems.com, on the Goffstown Democrats YouTube channel, and on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/GoffstownDems. Please like them. Feel free to share them widely with your friends, family, and everyone else. Thank you very much for being here today.